One corporate name has been synonymous with evil. When we've thought of the absolute worst company you could possibly work for in a video game, one name has always come to mind, and that name is Fazbear Entertainment. Their list of greatest hits is legendary in the worst possible way. Missing children, bad incidents that rearrange your brain's geography, mechanical entertainers with a deadly sense of showmanship, and a safety policy that reads more like a punchline to a very dark joke than an actual protocol. I thought we knew the absolute rock bottom of corporate malfeasance, but what if I told you that for all their sins, for all the blood on their checkered floors, Fazbear Entertainment's evil is one of lazy, reactive greed? What if there's another company out there, one hiding behind a much brighter, much more colorful facade, whose evil is proactive, systematic, and woven into the very fabric of its business model? How's it going? Lunarman here. Welcome to a new video. I'm going to make the case that Playtime Co is not just worse than Fazbear Entertainment. It operates on a level of calculated depravity that makes Fazbear's negligence look almost tame by comparison. I'm talking about a corporate culture that was founded on scientific malpractice, a business plan that required systemic employee abuse, and a production line quite literally fueled by the most unethical human experimentation imaginable. An operation so vile, so meticulously planned in its cruelty, that it turns William Afton's grand theater of horror into a cheap puppet show. So put on your grab pack, because today, we're reaching deep into the darkness to pull back a curtain Playtime Co never wanted lifted. To really understand the depths of Playtime Co's depravity, we first have to establish a baseline. We need to look at the reigning champion, Fazbear Entertainment, and understand the precise nature of their evil. Because when you put the two companies side by side, the difference isn't just in scale, it's in the very DNA of their corruption. The most infamous piece of evidence comes from the very first game, a chilling piece of corporate doublespeak delivered by the eternally stressed out phone guy.
Fazbear Entertainment is not responsible for damage to property or person. Upon discovering that damage or death has occurred, a missing person report will be filed within 90 days or as soon as property and premises have been thoroughly cleaned and bleached and the carpets have been replaced.
Let's really break that down, because this isn't just a standard liability waiver. This is a pre-established, formally documented protocol for evidence tampering and the obstruction of justice. A normal company, even a negligent one, would report a death or a disappearance immediately. It's a legal and moral obligation. Fazbear Entertainment, however, has a written policy that explicitly delays this report by up to 3 months. Why 90 days? It's a calculated cooling off period. It's enough time for public interest to wane, for witnesses to forget details, and most importantly, for evidence to be systematically destroyed. The policy doesn't just say, delay the report. It explicitly includes instructions for what to do in that 90-day window. Thoroughly cleaned and bleached and the carpets have been replaced. These are the precise actions one would take to eliminate all traces of a crime scene. Bleach is the classic go-to for destroying biological evidence like blood and DNA. Replacing the carpets ensures that any trace of evidence that has soaked through is completely removed. This policy elevates their culpability from passive negligence, failing to prevent a death, to active conspiracy after the fact. They have a formal, written procedure to actively cover up a murder. This isn't just about avoiding a lawsuit, it's about making a crime disappear. The disregard for human life extends to the very environment they create. The pizzerias are death traps even before you factor in the vengeful spirits. The most glaring example is, of course, the Springlock suits. These were hybrid animatronic costume devices so fundamentally flawed that a bit of moisture or a sudden movement could cause the animatronic endoskeleton parts to snap back into place, violently crushing the person inside. This wasn't a freak accident. It was a known design flaw, a danger so prevalent that the employees were given specific training on how to avoid dying while wearing them. Yet, the company kept them in service because it was cheaper than designing a safer alternative. This is the Fazbear way. Every decision is filtered through the lens of cost effectiveness. They hire night guards for less than minimum wage to oversee a menagerie of lethal robots. They use older, withered animatronics for spare parts in FNAF 2, even after spending a small fortune on the new toy models, because every penny saved is a penny earned. In a way, Fazbear Entertainment is a perfect, if cartoonish, representation of the corporate drive to replace costly, fragile humans with automated, cheaper solutions, no matter the risk. The danger you face at Freddy's is a direct byproduct of their budget cuts. Now, we come to the most crucial distinction when evaluating Fazbear Entertainment. For all their sins, they were not the ones who committed the foundational atrocity of the franchise, the missing children incident. That was the work of one man, the company's co-founder, William Afton. He was the serial killer, the monster who used the friendly facade of the pizzeria as his personal hunting ground. So, where does the company's guilt lie? Their primary sin in this context was creating the perfect environment for a predator like Afton to operate with total impunity. And then, when his crimes came to light, choosing to cover them up to protect their brand and their profits. When the bodies of the murdered children were discovered stuffed inside the animatronics, causing them to leak and emit a foul odor, the company's response wasn't to aid the investigation and bring a killer to justice. Their response was to dispose of the bodies, clean up the evidence, and rebrand, effectively allowing Afton to get away with it and kill again. This creates a twisted, almost symbiotic relationship between the killer and the corporation. Afton provided the attractions that brought in the money. He used the company's poor security and family-friendly image as a cloak for his horrific acts. The company, in turn, profited from his genius while willfully ignoring his monstrosity. They chose to manage the public relations fallout of his murders rather than address the murderer in their midst. Their negligence wasn't just a passive failure. It became an active service to Afton's evil. By choosing to sweep it under the rug, they became his accomplices. Their evil is one of profound, damning complicity. They didn't pull the trigger, but they meticulously cleaned the gun, hid it away, and then put up a "now hiring" sign. Now, let's turn our attention to Playtime Co. Where Fazbear Entertainment's evil was a liability they tried to hide, Playtime Co's evil was a calculated, board-approved asset. On the surface, Playtime Co is everything Fazbear Entertainment is not. Its marketing, viewed through the grainy filter of in-game VHS tapes, presents a world of wonder. It's a magical place founded by the seemingly benevolent Elliot Ludwig, a man whose only dream was to create toys that could make children happy. The commercials are filled with smiling children and revolutionary products like Poppy, the first truly intelligent doll in the world. They offer factory tours for just $2.99, promising a look into the most magical toy factory on Earth. It's a carefully constructed image of innocence and innovation. In the 1980s, Playtime Co was facing a crisis remarkably similar to Fazbear's. Profits were plummeting. Their new catnap toy was giving children night terrors, creating a PR nightmare. And, most importantly, employees were getting suspicious, seeing things they shouldn't and filing lawsuits. So, what was their solution? Did they hire better security? Did they improve their products? No. One of their top executives, a man named Dr. Harley Sawyer, pitched a revolutionary new plan, the Bigger Bodies Initiative. And this is the smoking gun, the single piece of evidence that damns them completely. The goal of the initiative, in Sawyer's own words, was to create giant, organic, living toys to serve as a new workforce. Why? To, and I quote,
increase our workforce and simultaneously decrease the number of lawsuits and people on our payroll if the people we have working aren't people.
Let that sink in. This was a formal proposal, a business solution presented to and approved by the company's leadership. They looked at their problems, falling profits, noisy employees, legal troubles, and decided the best way to solve them was to create a slave class of biological monstrosities. They didn't stumble into horror. They ran towards it with a business plan and a budget. They sought to replace their human workforce with giant, living toys that couldn't sue, couldn't complain, and couldn't leak company secrets. And where did they get the biological material for these new employees? We'll get to that. This establishes the foundational difference between the two companies. Fazbear Entertainment's history is a long, bloody list of failures. A failure to secure their restaurants, a failure to properly maintain their animatronics, and a failure to be honest about the horrific consequences. Playtime Co, facing the same pressures, didn't just fail. They innovated in the most monstrous way imaginable. They saw human life not as something to be protected, but as raw material to be exploited for corporate gain. One company is guilty of manslaughter on a massive scale through its apathy. The other is guilty of premeditated crimes against humanity as the very cornerstone of its business strategy. The true measure of a corporation's evil isn't just in its policies, but in the human toll it exacts. And when we compare the victims of Fazbear Entertainment to the resources of Playtime Co, the the moral chasm between them becomes an abyss. The victims in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe are undeniably tragic figures. The children of the missing children incidents, lured away and murdered by William Afton. The numerous night guards, hired for a pittance to sit in a death trap office. Even Afton's own children, victims of his neglect and cruelty. But what do they all have in common? Their status as victims is circumstantial. They were customers, or employees, or family members who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were targeted by one deeply evil individual, William Afton, whom the company was too greedy and incompetent to stop. They were never, ever part of Fazbear Entertainment's business plan. In fact, their deaths were a massive inconvenience. A dead child is a lawsuit, a police investigation, and a PR nightmare that hurts sales. A dead night guard is a hassle that requires filing a missing person report in 90 days and replacing the carpets. To Fazbear Entertainment, these people were either paying customers or disposable employees. Their value was in their living presence, and their deaths represented a net loss for the company. The tragedy is that the company valued their bottom line more than the lives that were being lost on their property. Now, let's step into Playtime Co's on-site orphanage, Playare. On the surface, it's presented as a benevolent initiative by the company's founder, Elliot Ludwig, to care for parentless children. But the truth, as revealed through the game's environmental storytelling and documents, is something far more sinister. Playare wasn't an orphanage. It was a human resources department. It was a holding pen. It was a dedicated, purpose-built supply chain of test subjects for the Bigger Bodies initiative. The evidence for this is overwhelming and sickening. The game station, which the children were forced to participate in, wasn't for fun. The VHS tapes explicitly described the games like musical memory as an advanced memory and cognitive recognition test designed to see how efficiently your brain works. They were aptitude tests. They were a systematic process for vetting children, for testing their reflexes, their memory, and their physical abilities to see if they were suitable candidates for experimentation. We even find assessment forums where employees like Sarah Abel and Matteo Lotta are documenting the performance of children like Michaela Hesop, rating them on their results. They were evaluating these orphans like lab rats. This is the horrifying truth of Playtime Co. The children in their care were not just victims of circumstance. They were raw materials. They were housed, fed, and educated for the sole purpose of being evaluated, and if they met the criteria, consumed by the corporate machine they were trapped inside. Their disappearance into a laboratory wasn't an unfortunate accident. It was the entire point of their existence at the factory. It was the successful culmination of the Playare program. This is what elevates Playtime Co. to a level of evil Fazbear Entertainment could never dream of. It's the institutionalization of dehumanization. For Fazbears, a child's death was a negative externality, a problem to be managed and covered up. For Playtime Co., a child's selection for an experiment was the desired outcome, a resource successfully acquired for the production line. Fazbear Entertainment is a company where horrible things happened. Playtime Co. is a company that was specifically designed to make horrible things happen. The very architecture of the factory, with an orphanage feeding directly into a testing area, which then leads to hidden laboratories, is proof of this systemic, predatory design. This represents a level of evil that is fundamentally deeper and more personal than anything Fazbear Entertainment ever conceived. Fazbear endangered its customers and employees. Playtime Co. weaponized the very concept of care and family. An orphanage is supposed to be a sanctuary, a place of safety for those who have none. Playtime Co. perverted that sacred trust. They used the authority and emotional bond between a caregiver and a child to evaluate that child not for adoption, but as raw material. It is the ultimate betrayal, a systematic violation of the most basic human duty to protect the innocent, all for the sake of corporate efficiency. While the Bigger Bodies initiative was born from a desire to solve the company's financial woes, the language used by the scientists involved reveals a motivation that transcends simple greed. It's a terrifying form of scientific hubris, a corporate god complex. We see this most clearly in the final log VHS tape found in Chapter 1. A scientist records his thoughts while, in the background, we can hear the screams of his colleagues being slaughtered by the very creations he helped make. But he isn't horrified. He isn't remorseful. He is annoyed. He laments that the escape of Experiment 1006, the prototype, was a flaw in the scientific process. His final, chilling declaration, as the chaos closes in, is this:
"We must forge onwards in the name of science, whether those who are beneath us understand it or not."
This is the voice of a man who believes his work is more important than human life. He and his colleagues didn't just see themselves as toy makers. They saw themselves as pioneers, as creators of life itself. In their minds, their work transcended conventional morality. The orphans weren't children, they were test subjects. The employees weren't people, they were acceptable losses. Any human cost was justified in their relentless pursuit of a scientific breakthrough. This is a far cry from Fazbear Entertainment's simple, grubby greed. Fazbear wanted to make money, Playtime Co wanted to play God, and they were more than willing to sacrifice children on the altar of their ambition. The ultimate proof lies in the monsters themselves. When you compare what is hunting you, the nature of the abomination reveals the most critical distinction. One company is dealing with a ghost problem they can't control, while the other is the proud, twisted parent of his own abominations. The animatronics of Fazbear Entertainment are terrifying, there's no doubt about that. But why are they dangerous? Because they're possessed. They are hollow machines, vessels inhabited by the vengeful, confused, and agonized souls of the children William Afton murdered. Their monstrosity is a supernatural consequence of a crime, not a feature of their design. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy were just supposed to be clunky, singing robots. Their programming was for birthday parties, not for bloodshed. The horror of FNAF is, at its heart, a ghost story. It's a haunting born from a terrible tragedy that the company was too negligent to prevent and too cowardly to properly address. The children are ghosts possessing a shell. With the notable exception of the Funtime animatronics from Sister Location, which were a personal project of William Afton's, designed specifically for kidnapping, and not a mainstream Fazbear Entertainment product line. The animatronics are dangerous by accident. The company is, in a very real sense, a victim of the same haunting that plagues the player. They are trying to manage a paranormal event that is far beyond their understanding, and they are failing miserably. Their solution is to board up rooms, lie to the public, and hire a stream of disposable night guards to keep the problem contained. The creatures of Playtime Co, on the other hand, are not accidents. They are not ghosts in the machine. They are the victims, the intended product of advanced, unethical, and horrifying science. Huggy Wuggy, Mommy Longlegs, Catnap, Foxy Boo, they are living, breathing biological organisms created through grotesque surgical and chemical processes in the factory's hidden labs. When Huggy Wuggy is injured, he bleeds real blood because he is a living, breathing creature. They are the triumphant successes of the Bigger Bodies initiative. This is a story of vivisection, of body horror, of scientific atrocity on an industrial scale. The lore makes the process chillingly clear. Dr. Sawyer and his team of innovationists perfected a method to transfer human consciousness and even living body parts into these giant toy bodies. The key ingredient was a strange, gel-like substance infused with poppy flowers, a detail hinted at in an early experimental log where scientists dipped a dead rat into the gel in a failed attempt to resuscitate it. They eventually realized they needed living human subjects, and so, the orphans from Playare became their test subjects and, ultimately, their core components. Each monster we encounter is a testament to their scientific achievement. Mommy Longlegs was once an orphan named Marie Payne. The dinosaur toy, Brawn, was a terminally ill employee named Thomas Clark who volunteered for the procedure. Catnap was an orphan named Theodore Granville, transformed after a failed escape attempt orchestrated by the prototype nearly killed him. These creatures are the pinnacle of Playtime Co's research and development. This makes the evil of Playtime Co far more profound and active. They are the masters of their own, fully understood abominations. They are a corporation of mad scientists, willfully breaking the laws of nature and morality for the sake of profit. Fazbear Entertainment is trying to contain a ghost story. Playtime Co wrote its own horror story in the language of biology and perverted science. This leads to a much deeper, philosophical horror. Fazbear Entertainment's actions, and Afton's actions, led to the loss of humanity. A child dies, and their soul is trapped. It's a tragedy of life cut short. Playtime Co's actions, however, led to the perversion of humanity. The victims of the Bigger Bodies initiative didn't simply die. Their consciousness, their biology, their very being was forcibly twisted and integrated into a new, monstrous form. They were stripped of their human identity and turned into a piece of company property, a bigger body. This is a more profound and complete form of dehumanization. The victims at Freddy's lost their lives. The victims at Playtime Co. lost their very right to be considered human, their bodies becoming patents and products in a corporate portfolio of horrors. Finally, let's look at what it was like to work for these two companies. For one, it was a dead-end job with a high risk of a gruesome end. For the other, it was a conspiracy where knowing the truth was a capital offense. Being an employee at Fazbear Entertainment, particularly a night guard, was a terrible job. The pay was abysmal, the conditions were awful, and your co-workers were homicidal animatronics. The company's official stance on the clear and present danger was one of complete denial and aggressive liability dodging. They knew the animatronics were dangerous. They knew night guards went missing. But their solution was to pre-record some training tapes, make you sign a waiver, and hope for the best. The danger was a known occupational hazard that the company willfully ignored because it was cheaper than actually fixing the problem. They didn't necessarily want their employees to be killed and stuffed into suits, but they had clearly accepted it as a recurring cost of doing business. The death of a night guard was an HR issue, an inconvenience that required some paperwork and cleaning. The company's relationship with its low-level employees was one of profound, callous indifference. You were a disposable cog in a machine that might, at any moment, literally chew you up and spit you out. At Playtime Co., the danger wasn't just from the giant, monstrous workforce. The real danger was the truth. For an employee at Playtime Co., the most hazardous thing you could do was be curious. The company's entire business model was built on a secret so horrific that its exposure would mean the end of everything. And they took extreme measures to protect that secret. The story of Rowan Stoll, pieced together from various ARG tapes and memos, is the ultimate proof of this. Stoll was an employee who started digging into things he wasn't supposed to. He found out about the experiments, about the true nature of the toys. He planned to become a whistleblower, scheduling a 60-minute maintenance window to shut down security so he could leak everything and run. In one of his final recordings, he says,
"I think they're gonna kill me fast."
And he was right. A later note confirms that Rowan Stoll's death was caught on tape. He was Boxy Boo's first victim. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't the case of a malfunctioning toy. This was a targeted assassination. A corporate asset, one of the bigger body's experiments, was dispatched to hunt down and eliminate an employee who threatened to expose the company's crimes. This went beyond negligent endangerment and into malicious oppression. Other memos hint at this culture of fear and secrecy, with employees like Patty Hall being demoted and sent to isolated storage areas for sabotaging a project, likely because she discovered the truth about what they were creating. This elevates Playtime Co.'s corporate malpractice to a whole new level. For Fazbear Entertainment, an employee is disposable. For Playtime Co., a knowledgeable employee is a threat to be neutralized. Their evil wasn't just directed at the orphans they used as raw materials, but at their own workforce. The entire human element of the company was divided into two categories: resources to be consumed, or liabilities to be eliminated. It was a conspiracy of silence to be enforced by murder. Finally, let's look at their core motivations. Fazbear Entertainment's motivation is consistently, almost comically, simple. Greed. They cut corners on safety to save money. They cover up murders to avoid bad press that would hurt sales. And arguably worst of all, they allegedly recycle uneaten pizza slices. Their evil is mundane, pathetic, and utterly predictable in its grubby pursuit of the almighty dollar. Playtime Co.'s motivation is a terrifying fusion of that same corporate greed with a deranged scientific megalomania. The Bigger Bodies initiative was pitched as a way to solve financial problems, to cut costs and lawsuits. But the methods they employed and the language used by the scientists reveal a deeper, more disturbing drive. They were trying to conquer the boundaries between life and death, between man and machine. They saw human lives as acceptable collateral damage for achieving their scientific breakthroughs. Fazbear's evil is about subtraction. It's about cutting costs, cutting safety measures, cutting corners. It's an evil born from a failure of morality. Playtime Co.'s evil is about addition. It's about adding human parts to machines, adding to their scientific knowledge, adding to their power over life itself. It's an active, aggressive assault on morality. Every tragedy has a breaking point, a singular event that defines its legacy of horror. For Fazbear Entertainment, it was the missing children incident. For Playtime Co., it was the hour of joy. And the difference between these two events is the final nail in the coffin for this debate. The missing children incident was a crime perpetuated by an individual, William Afton, that happened to Fazbear Entertainment. It was an external force of evil that used the company as its stage. The company's great crime was its response, a cowardly, greedy cover-up. The MCI was the event that exposed the company's pre-existing moral bankruptcy to the world. The Hour of Joy, on the other hand, was not an incident. It was an uprising, a rebellion. It was the direct, violent, and utterly inevitable consequence of Playtime Co.'s own actions. On August 8, 1995, the experiments, the tortured souls that the company had created, rose up, organized by the hyper-intelligent and malevolent Experiment 1006. The prototype, the toys turned on their creators and systematically slaughtered nearly every human being left in the factory. This wasn't a crime that happened to them. This was the harvest they had sown, come to reap them in blood. The violence of the missing children incident was targeted and predatory, committed by one man against a handful of children. It was a singular, horrific act. The violence of the Hour of Joy was a factory-wide massacre. It was widespread, brutal, and indiscriminate. As Poppy herself tells us at the end of Chapter 3, on that day, the guilty pay for their crimes, but so did the innocent. The toys, driven by years of unimaginable torture and manipulated by the whispers of the prototype, saw every human employee as a part of the system that had created and tormented them. They tore through scientists, guards, and administrative staff alike, creating piles of bodies in their wake. This leads to the most chilling legacy of all. The missing children incident created ghosts, spirits who were singularly focused on getting revenge against their killer and finding some measure of peace. Their horror, while terrifying, is largely contained and directed. The Hour of Joy, however, created something far more complex and terrible. It created a new, violent ecosystem within the factory walls. The victims of Playtime Co.'s experiments became the new oppressors, perpetuating a cycle of violence born from their own trauma. They didn't just get revenge, they took over the prison, and now they run it with the same brutality they were taught. We see them hunting each other, like when Dog Day is chained up and slowly devoured by the smaller smiling critter experiments. They are ruled over by the tyrannical will of the prototype, who punishes any who defy him as heretics. Playtime Co. did not just create monsters, they created a failed state, a self-perpetuating hell of their own design. The horror didn't end with the Hour of Joy, it simply changed management. And that is a far more complex and damning legacy than a few haunted pizzerias. So, where does that leave us? We've compared the policies, the motivations, the creations, and the consequences, and the conclusion, I think, is very clear. The core of the argument comes down to the distinction between reactive negligence and proactive malice. Fazbear Entertainment is a story of a pathologically greedy company that allowed a monster to thrive in its shadows. When that monster's actions threatened their business, they chose to hide the bodies to protect their stock price. It is a tale of criminal incompetence, moral cowardice, and a level of apathy so profound it becomes its own form of evil. Playtime Co., however, is a story of a company that was the monster. It didn't just allow atrocities to happen, it designed, funded, and implemented them as a matter of corporate policy. It built a system to procure, process, and torture human beings, transforming them into products, all under the bright, cheerful banner of innovation in children's entertainment. While a job at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza might get you killed, a job at Playtime Co. might force you to ask what part of your soul you're willing to sell just to make it to your lunch break. Fazbear Entertainment is a haunted house with a very shady landlord. Playtime Co. is the architect, the builder, and the warden of a scientific hell on Earth. They are not just worse than Fazbear Entertainment. They have redefined what corporate evil in gaming can look like. Their very existence was a crime against humanity. But what do you think? Is there any defense for Playtime Co.? Or have they officially taken the crown for the worst company in horror gaming? Let me know your verdict down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to drop a like and subscribe for more. Also ring that bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.